India consumes more sugar than any other nation on Earth. And for most of modern history, it has been one of the undisputed giants of global production, growing enough sugarcane to feed its own massive population and still export millions of tons overseas. But recently, the supply chain abruptly reversed. In late 2026, Indian refiners took 350,000 tons of sugar originally bound for foreign markets and diverted it straight back into the domestic supply. The sudden shortage was driven by a collision of factors. Production totals came in significantly lower than expected, largely because extreme weather patterns severely damaged the crop right before the harvest. Combine that with a massive surge in local demand for upcoming festivals, and prices began to spike. To force prices back down and ensure enough supply remained within its own borders, the Indian government stepped in and restricted foreign exports entirely. The fact that India is struggling to find enough sugar is deeply ironic, because the very concept of crystallized, refinable sugar, the exact substance that the modern world relies on, was invented here. Over 2,000 years ago, sugarcane was a native wild grass growing across the Indian subcontinent. Early populations recognized it held a sweet liquid, but it was highly perishable and difficult to store. That changed around 350 AD. Indian craftsmen discovered that boiling and processing sugarcane juice chemically transforms it. It precipitates out into solid, transportable granules. In ancient Sanskrit, these gritty crystals were called sharkara. When they refined it further into large solid chunks, they called it khanda. Say those words aloud today, and you can hear the direct phonetic ancestors of the English words sugar and candy. These granules were entirely new to the West. Indian, Persian, and Arab merchants began moving sharkara along early trade routes into medieval Europe, where it was treated as a highly prized, extraordinarily expensive spice. By crystallizing the liquid, ancient Indian chemists solved the storage problem. They turned a localized tropical reed into a durable commodity, creating a product so lucrative it would soon drive empires to conquer entire continents just to grow it. In 1493, Christopher Columbus loaded sugarcane seedlings onto his ships and transported them to the Americas. The hot, humid climate of the Caribbean proved perfect for the crop, triggering an absolute explosion in plantation agriculture. Sugar rapidly became known as white gold. But extracting the sucrose before it spoiled required grueling, relentless physical labor and massive economies of scale. The plants had to be chopped, hauled, and crushed at breakneck speed. To feed this demand for rapid, expendable labor, European empires scaled up the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans were kidnapped, shipped across the ocean, and forced to endure horrific conditions to operate these plantation mills. Following the abolition of slavery in the 1800s, colonial powers faced a sudden labor vacuum. Instead of paying fair wages, they instituted a system of indentured servitude. Hundreds of thousands of laborers were recruited, often under deceptive terms, from colonial India and southern China. They were shipped to distant plantations in places like Fiji, Mauritius, and the West Indies to keep the cane harvests moving. For centuries, European consumers enjoyed cheap, plentiful sugar in their tea and baked goods, but that mass market pricing was entirely subsidized by human exploitation and forced labor. Europe's total reliance on tropical plantations became a massive liability in the early 19th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, British naval blockades successfully cut off France's access to imported Caribbean cane sugar. Desperate for a local alternative, European governments subsidized a German chemical breakthrough. Scientists proved they could extract identical sucrose molecules from a cold-climate root vegetable, the sugar beet. This chart shows the impact. As industrial beet factories scaled up across Europe, they captured over 50% of the global sugar market by the 1880s. Entirely new industrialized agricultural sectors sprang up across North America and Europe. Huge loads of beets were hauled from local farms to massive steam-powered processing plants. The sugar beet broke the tropical monopoly. By proving that sucrose could be harvested outside the equator, it decentralized global production and ended Europe's absolute dependence on colonial cane. Even with the rise of the sugar beet and the eventual collapse of colonial empires, the tropical cane industry adapted. India rebuilt its infrastructure and successfully reclaimed its title as a dominant global producer. But sugarcane retains the same biological weaknesses it had 2,000 years ago. It still requires intense manual labor to harvest, and it is incredibly sensitive to the availability of water and the stability of the local climate. Which brings us back to India's modern crisis. The crop failures and emergency export curbs we are seeing today are the direct result of erratic monsoons, severe droughts, and unpredictable weather patterns battering the fields. This dual-axis chart illustrates the exact correlation. As we trace the rising frequency of extreme weather events in India on one axis, we see a nearly immediate corresponding spike in global sugar prices on the other. A drought in one country now squeezes the entire global supply chain. We have spent 3,000 years optimizing how to extract and trade this single molecule. But as India's current shortages prove, we haven't eliminated the cost of our sweetness. We have simply traded the brutal human exploitation of the colonial era for the severe ecological fragility of a warming world.